Beautiful.
Where are you?
I'm in the Bay of Islands in the north of New Zealand.
Ah, cool. Awesome.
So, welcome and thank you for being here, Bruce.
Sure.
Shall we just start?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, first I just want to, take the audience. This is for me a completely premiere. So just to take the audience a little bit what one movement is. One movement is a frequency, a field, where we really come into the consciousness that we are one being organism and let go the whole fragmented consciousness that is around the planet. And we have created a form, the 1001 days Earth cycle, which we are on day 8 now, today. And yeah, every day there is a transmission coming through. And it's, for me, it's also a journey. I don't know where it goes. I just really surrender to the void and the life force. And it's exciting. It's scary. It's beautiful. It's, yeah, I'm ready to be on this adventure. And we have every 30 days, we have a theme. And we start with the We Are Power. And as you are an embodiment of power, I asked you to be on our first transmission and sharing of what it means. We are in this very powerful times on this planet with humanity. And I feel we really need, as a collective field, we need a different approach. And I would like to hear from you, what is true power?
Sure. Well, it's a deep question, and maybe I would begin by just saying what it isn't, because unfortunately, we're still struggling to understand what love is, and power lies deeper than love. So most of our civilization is bent upon thinking that power is something that can be acquired in the outside. So, power is influence, or power is money, or power is charisma, or power is somehow the capacity to influence our environment in some way that, that we decide is a good thing. But in a way, this is not power at all. This is powerlessness seeking to have power by getting something. So, almost the doorway to power is the failure of the civilization. And in a way, the civilization that we're in is just really refusing to face its failure. So it's, we're continuing to think that there's something that we can do, that maybe if we just have the right science, or the strong enough politicians or whatever, that they can they can lead us into this greater control of our environment. Excuse me. But my experience is that power emerges for an individual, or organism, or a country, or a world, when it has truly and completely failed in the acquisition project. So power emerges out of not just failing, but actually admitting you're failing, and therefore turning it into an initiation. So most people would know this as the dark night of the soul, that because we have a culture that is uninitiated in what it really means to have deep connection to soul and spirit, then we mostly find our power through failing at being successful in the civilization. And that dark night is normally when we go deeply inside ourselves, and where we find the source of our life and death are the same. And so that any attempt to avoid death by having power or dominion over life is ultimately doomed to to failure, but that failure is an initiation and a surrender. And you were mentioning at the beginning that you're in the unknown and you're surrendering to the void. And, you know, that's one of the signatures of power, is to go into the dark night, not fighting, you know, for survival, but to go into the dark night deeply trusting that at the core of our beings is the unknown, is a doorway into greater life that only asks one thing of you, you know, which is everything. You know, that doorway asks your full surrender, your full and complete surrender and trust to the mystery of what you are at the deepest core of your being. And then the life that lives at the very core can begin to emerge. You know, the black hole that's beating at the core of your heart or the core of the galaxy of yourself starts to activate. And then it's not even that you become alive, it's that you are life. The life that is before you're a soul, before you're a human being, before you are incarnate into this animal body, you are the life of the universe. And that life is abundant and limitless. And it is not something that needs to be hoarded. It's something just that begins to live out of the core of the being. So for people to get in touch with their power, it's kind of synonymous, you know, it's the same thing as completely going in and finding the piece of ourselves that we have abandoned because of the society that we live in, that is a doorway to life itself. And when we find that, then we, you know, we become lived rather than, you know, we become powerful. But when people become alive, when they truly have life force moving through them, then that is experienced by people around them as power and empowerment, because it electrifies and brings fearlessness and brings the courage, not of a hero who's able to control his world, but somebody who has surrendered to being so out of control that that life lives you. So that's a, you know, maybe a beginning of an introduction into discussion about power.
Thank you. Yeah, it deeply touches my whole being. Like your being penetrates me consciously since about 2 years. I have always felt unconsciously like this attraction to the void, to just this mystery. But my personality was still trying to figure out and somehow to fit in society. And just when when you came consciously into my field, it was like coming home. And also there, it's like layers of, there's a way of like, I feel something is dying even more and more and more. So I'm deeply touched by this process of fully embracing that voice. And I know for a lot of people also who probably going to see this and listen to this whole dark energy, dark light, void, the black holes is a new concept or a new idea or a new information. Can you say something to those layers of, that building a bridge maybe also for our
Sure.
that is here and trying to grasp somehow?
Yeah, maybe first of all, I'll say a little bit about that attraction to dying, you know, that you mentioned, that, you know, when you recognize that something's calling you, and the Greeks have a word for it, which is thanatos. And we know the reverse, which is eros. In fact, a lot of people on their awakening path and their tantric path, you know, unpack their eros as a way of like connecting with their life force. And certainly our life force is stored in our sexuality and in our body, but so is thanatos. And what thanatos is the attraction to death. And of course, because we live in a society that's afraid of death, we stay away from this. But dying is a good thing. Like, and being in touch with our death is a great thing. And at a certain point in our lives, you know, we're attracted deeply to death. unfortunately, because we don't understand how we can psychologically die, and it's time for our soul sometimes to experience death, that we mistranslate it into the physical. And of course, the huge suicide rate in the world, you now have more chance of killing yourself, than you do of a terror attack. That's because we have not learned how to initiate ourselves by balancing life and death. So the attraction to death is a sign that you're ready for transition, or to come to a doorway of initiation, and that you're ready to let go of a part of yourself that has got you to the door but is no longer going to serve you. And humanity is kind of stuck, like initiation interruptus, because of this fear of death, that we don't understand that there is soul initiation doors to go through, and that magnetic attraction that just is more fascinating than anything in the world is a beautiful sign that that dark light is working. So then I want to say something about the dark, because the great fear that we have of the dark, and particularly because we associate dark often in our heads with evil and shadow and everything that the light has not been able to reach. But the kind of dark I'm talking about is not that darkness of where light has not been able to illuminate yet. It's the darkness that light itself comes from. And the beautiful thing about cosmology is that whatever reveals itself in our human psyche starts to become the center of our culture. And so just like when the sun revealed itself as the center, when we realized, in the Renaissance, that we went around the sun, it caused a huge change in civilization that then became solar. So we've had a solar civilization for thousands of years now. And what a solar civilization does is it enthrones consciousness as the God. Reason and science and understanding and knowing, that became the God for a few thousand years. But from 2000 on, when we realized that there's a black hole at the center of the galaxy, that our sun is not the center, it goes around this black hole. And in fact, there are billions of galaxies colliding and going around each other, that there is a whole greater energy than just consciousness and just knowing. So then we begin to start to put the mystery at the center. Instead of knowing the answer, we start to live the question of the mystery. And that's what the dark is. So people are afraid of the dark because of the connotations of it, of being everything that's been repressed in our shadow and our primal self. But actually there's a deep, higher dark, a divine darkness, which is the source of light and the source of matter at the same time. And that darkness provides a deep freedom from fear, because if you're just living in knowing and consciousness, then when that consciousness gets deeply challenged, when we reach the end of everything that we know, we get afraid and we pull back. So our society is doing that, like we're trying to know the answers, and we're trying to get ourselves out of climate change and get ourselves out of coronavirus and so on. But actually there's a deeper mystery that comes from being in the not knowing and understanding that there is a deeper force at work than just human consciousness trying to control its environment. So when we come to that darkness ourselves, we're normally exhausted because there isn't good role models that help us understand this divine darkness. So normally we exhaust everything we can about knowing, trying to control, trying to understand, and then only then do we fall into the dark. And then we find the dark, instead of being a horrible place, is actually a sweet and beautiful place that doesn't require you to understand all of the answers in order to live. So I think Einstein said, at the core, you have to decide, is it a friendly universe? If it's a friendly universe, you can fall into the void, you can fall into emptiness, and you will be resurrected repeatedly. And you will then know that you can deeply trust the divine darkness that is deeper than knowing.
You once said, our purpose as humanity is not to survive, but to love. This is also what you just said, like really, can we give up the idea that we are here to survive and sink into a deeper purpose and really touch the core of what it means to be human?
Yeah, I think it's a real tragedy that human beings um, still think of themselves really as like dependent children on the earth, instead of like loving partners to and part of this intelligent being. And I think a lot of it comes from that very fear of death. You know, we have primal instincts, afraid of the tiger eating us, or, you know, plague coming. And you can see it now with the coronavirus, is that when our fear of death is activated, when our base chakra is sending up messages about survival, then we will make survival the most important thing. And anybody who's done their soul work understands that actually the most important thing is not whether your body mind survives. The most important thing is if you remember who you are, if you remember what you came to be, and remember who you are at your deepest level, which is love. So human beings as sentient part of the conscious universe are love. And you can see it express itself over and over again. At times where survival is threatened, then some people will go into panic and shut down, and they will throw away their humanity in order to survive, because survival at all costs is the main thing. And we'll hear these voices from politicians and so on saying, we have to survive, because if you can survive, you can always love later. But actually, it's at the times of survival, you know, like, you know, someone like Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps in the Second World War, or times where there's unbelievable pressures to survive, then the best of human nature can surface. And the best of human nature is love. Love in the face of fear, love in the face of fear of our own death, love in the face of chaos and catastrophe. Those times allow us to initiate ourselves by deciding at the core of ourselves, who am I really? Like, am I somebody who has to survive first, or am I somebody who loves first? And each person makes that decision in their own way, in their own life. But it's a fundamental difference between the culture that we're leaving, which is based on survival and control, and the one that's coming, which is based on our love and our inherent freedom. And through that door of love, we find power. And the reason we find power is because in the universe, love wins. On Earth, maybe quarantined in this little immature, you know, box, you know, that we're on, maybe survival rules for now. But in the universe, love rules. So, you know, if you decide to love, all of a sudden you have the whole of the universe behind you, supporting you, flowing through you. If you decide to survive, there's just you and, you know, the whatever structures, your bank account and, you know, whatever structures you've created around you. So I feel like, you know, choosing love is actually, you know, the most beautiful and the most empowering and the most delicious option, because your life really starts to become alive.
I just want to breathe a moment with that. Yeah, Nora, you wanted to say something?
It's a bit like coming home to something bigger than just staying with the concept that is around us. Or at least for me, all those teachings are, I don't listen to the teachings or read it since such a long time. I heard from it through Serena. And for me, it feels really a bit like coming home to something that has not just a bigger purpose, but it's free from all the concept that our society tells us how we have to be, what we have to be, what we have to do, how we have to act, how we have to fit into the concept.
Sure. And, you know, I think the coming home is coming home to that love, but it's also coming home outside our individuality, because I think that many people are caught up in this being an individual. And I think part of the answer to power is falling back to the place that's behind our individuality, where the oneness that we talk about isn't just an emotional oneness or a oneness of heart, but it's a oneness of the essential spirit. And not just a oneness of human beings. It's not just humans are one. It's that we're one with all of the kingdoms in nature, the higher and the lower kingdoms, and we're one with the universal life, this consciousness that permeates the whole of the universe. So that home is like the ground of our being. It's our birthright and our matrix. And somewhere along the line, we've had to abandon that. Nobody's taking it from us. We've abandoned it. So when we go back through that doorway, then it's like coming home, and we remember that it has always been there inside of us and just waiting for us to return.
Can you say in this moment something about the monad and the soul and the personality? I think that's a good, also to bridge a bit those layers of where is the self, where is the bigger picture, where are all the dimensions?
Sure. Yeah, well, one of the things that I love to do is refer to cosmology, because all of our spiritual traditions in the world, many of them get stuck, like they get future-proof, like Muhammad future-proofed the Quran by saying there'll be no more revelations, or Christianity stays stuck, or even Hinduism or Buddhism, they stay stuck in their own traditions and their dogmas. But when you look at cosmos, you can see all of these patterns are there in the heavens. So the idea of like Vishnu and Brahma and Shiva, or the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, all of these trinities in all of our traditions refer to these different levels of being that we can see in cosmology. So our personality is kind of like the earth or the planet. And around it, we have a moon, which is our emotions and our sexuality and our unconscious, because there's a dark side to the moon. And then we have the sun, our soul. We even call it the soul. It's the place where we shine. And, we have our own Facebook page, and our soul, starts to have nuclear fuel at the core of its being. And then deeper than the soul is what the soul circles, which is the monad. So in the Christian tradition, Jesus, the Son of God, said that I have to go back to the Father and then return. So this is the Christian version of the same thing that's in many different traditions, which is that we have these different levels of our being. We have our personal body-mind development that often develops in the first 28 years of our life. Then if we do our soul work, we have our soul. We shine the light that is uniquely ours, that comes from our contribution to the world. And then in the last, third of your life, the darkness opens. It can open at any level, because all of these levels are us all of the time. But when the darkness opens, you become more like the invisible black hole, the monad, that's at the core of the sun, rather than the sun that's doing the shining and out there in the world. So that's what really an elder should be, is somebody who has gone dark and allows other people to shine around them. So this idea of the personality and the soul and the monad is just the triplicity of being that we are all of. We all have a body mind, we all have a soul, and we all have a spiritual core, which is another word for the monad. And at different stages of life, we're more in touch with one or the other. And part of the mystery of development is to be able to bring them together, just like a galaxy, where they all coexist. And we're able to function and, take our kids to school and, do our tax return at the same time as being transpersonally awake and able to connect with the shamanic and the spiritual realms, at the same time knowing the mystery of eternity and infinity beating at our core. And we're able to do that all, and function, driving in traffic. So that's the kind of integration of those levels. But those levels, exist for everyone, whatever they call them.
I think it was yesterday or the day before that you were sharing in a transmission, the gap, I call it the gap between what people can handle, like the overwhelm, and what is needed on this planet, like this gap of, okay, what can we handle, are our systems built to literally energetically transfer, and what is needed, and seems to be a gap. And how you were talking about how to use the black power to close that gap. I would like to deepen that theme a bit.
Sure. Well, I think the easiest way is to start with the individual, and then we'll go to the planet. And often in the individual life, you can see somebody who has maybe resisted their own development, as the whole world has done. And so, the little synchronicities start to turn into, a more severe intervention by their soul, which turns into a Mack truck. Some kind of outer crisis comes along to force them to go into their awakening process. And during that time, there's a narrow line between how much is coming up from the past in order to be healed and how much you can handle. So, we all get as much suffering as we can handle, hopefully, because that suffering is the doorway to our awakening. And Carl Jung said that, all neurosis is caused by illegitimate suffering. In other words, the refusal to suffer. So there's a healthy suffering, which means the turning to face the grief inside us, the turning to face the failure of our projects of trying to, be successful. And in that gap, we chew away at our karma. We chew it away at the things that we need to integrate. So the trouble with the world is that, the world has kind of delayed its suffering. It's pushed it out. And so that means that it's coming up. And for example, when the Second World War happened, you saw a major upwelling of the shadow of humanity that played out in major drama. So sometimes it's possible to integrate our shadow when it rises, and sometimes it's not. So what we can use that energy of the black hole, of the dark, of the monad for, is that it chews up the energy that we are not yet ready to integrate. Okay, so we all have traumas that we're not ready to face, and humanity has that as well. It takes a long time, for example, to process out the Holocaust and the Second World War. Humanity just chugs away at it over time, or racism in America, or these are like big traumas in cultures and civilizations. And at times of initiation, those traumas come up to be healed. Some of them can come into the light and be loved and integrated, and some of them the civilization or the culture is not ready for. And so using the energy of the monad, it's a bit like sending in, matter and suns into a black hole. It absorbs that matter. And so acts of compassion, for ourselves and for others are to understand, like the serenity prayer, what needs to come up and be integrated and what needs to be just passed through into the darkness, into the emptiness, and allowed to recycle for later.
Can you say a bit more, what does that concretely mean, to pass that flow, to have that current?
Sure. Well, again, it's easier if I explain it in the individual sense, is that most people in their own awakening process go from a time of thinking they are just their body, and then their energy fields activate, whether you call it prana or chi or chakras or whatever, but they become alive energetically. And this is like the light body, is another way of saying it. And so they have a process where Kundalini starts to rise, and these two serpents that come up the spine, Ida Pingala, that talked about in the Eastern tradition, but there's an aliveness that happens in the body as an energy being. Okay, so that's connected to the soul. So as the soul activates, it activates the energy body. But deeper than that, those two serpents is the central column, which in some traditions is called the Shushumna, but it's the central dark column that your energy body dances around. That's the current of dark, if you like, that's connected to the monad and connected to the core of the heart, that you can let energy run up that. So when the energy comes up your energy body, it normally comes into consciousness, and you're working to expand consciousness as a result of it rising. When the energy runs up the dark column, the dragon column or the Shishumna, it just goes straight through to the void. And, you know, it doesn't require you to process it all out, which the consciousness work does. So we have this idea that's been going on now for hundreds of years, that it's a very solar idea, which is that if we get the world consciousness to a high enough level, if we get enough, you know, enlightened beings on the planet, then the 100-monkey tipping point will happen and the world consciousness will raise and go into the fourth dimension or fifth dimension or whatever, and everything will be right. But that's a kind of consciousness dream. And the reality is that the consciousness on the planet is not going to get there by more consciousness. So you have to go to a deeper level. Again, Einstein said you can't solve a problem from the level it's created. So we've created the problem by too much consciousness. More consciousness won't solve the problem. And you might know people who have really developed their consciousness, but they don't necessarily change their behavior. So the changing of behavior requires will, and that will is the dark. So if you get past consciousness and the need to know, even the need to process all of your trauma and allow that trauma to be fuel for the dark current, then it will help you become alive. And of course, there's a byproduct that your consciousness will expand, but it's not what you're aiming for. So, you know, it's a complicated subject, but I hope that gives you a taste of it.
It does. It for me, it's, yeah, I feel like it's exactly that. I have, in my development, I have reached a limit of consciousness, and where naturally I was pulled back into exactly the Shushuma darkness, and really that's giving up, like not wanting to understand more, not wanting to reach anything anymore, but really just this deep surrender. So I just would like to give a bit more substance for people who are just, you know, maybe starting that process. Yeah, what it practically means to sink into that deeper surrender. And maybe we can maybe you can share also a bit from your process, how you experience that, how you could just sink deeper.
Yeah, well, I think in the future, when we know more about the dark and we understand it, then people from the beginning will be able to understand that it's there. So, for example, when we really understand that the soul's there, then when a child is born, we don't just see them as, you know, somebody who's going to carry on the family business or who's got your eyes or whatever. We see them as a soul, somebody who's already carrying deep wisdom and a gift. And we see the inner being rather than just seeing what we want on the outside. So that's, and you know, and that's, we don't really have that in the world. We don't have conscious conception and birth in large part. So souls aren't sung in and welcomed as the beings they are. So we have to go through this process of finding ourselves. But deeper than the soul is the monad. That's the one life that lives inside the core of each person. If we start to see them as that from the beginning, then of course they can still do their soul development and they can still develop a body mind. But because we do it the other way around, most people develop their body mind first, become successful at something that they don't want to be successful at, that their mother wanted them to be or society wanted them to be. Then they have a midlife crisis and fail at that, and then they do their soul awakening work. And then gradually after their soul awakens, then they go to the monad. Well, if we did the reverse, which hopefully we will do in the future, we would start with the one life at the core of a human being, then see their soul, and then let them build a body mind, a life of what to do in the world based on who they truly are. So, yeah, I can't remember your question right now because I got carried away in that, but so tell it me again.
Deeply touching. I think this is already an answer, like really to change our perception of reality. In really in sensing it, like in letting it sink into really see that in exactly that order. First we are this life force, and then soul, and then we can build our body mind structure. I think that's a really beautiful, yeah, like,
Yeah, I remember now you were asking me about my own life,
yeah.
and because I bought the, you know, the myth, like as a young man, you know, I went to university early and then traveled the world looking for the mystery. But then I tried to settle in and like, okay, well, maybe either the world's crazy or I'm crazy. I'm not narcissistic enough to think it's the world. So I'll try to fit into this greater wisdom of what's around me. I wish I could go back and change that decision, by the way, because it was the world that was crazy. But so I tried to, like, you know, do the things that would be successful. And the times that I awoke most deeply was from abject, complete failure. So my first marriage was a failure, not because it ended, but because I didn't know how to end it. I didn't know why it was ending, and I tried to hold on to it too long, and it created a mess. You know, my second marriage also ended, but, you know, successfully, in the sense that it was loving and beautiful and less painful. But so the first failure made me realize that actually relationship is not something that I can get good at and do. And if I just apply enough will and dedication, then, you know, surely I can, you know, learn communication techniques and so on, and it will be successful. And then I also failed financially. You know, I lost in the 1987 share market crash. I lost everything in one night, all of my resources, and lived in a van for a couple of years, and, you know, and gave teachings for donations. And that was such a beautiful gift to me, of like cleansing me around ever trying to make a living, ever trying to like go out and be successful in the world, because I found that when I gave that up and I just had to be who I was, then my soul came forward and came forth. And then the last failure was like then doing my soul mission, you know, which was now I'm inspired and, you know, I'm a divine being and I can have the force of the universe behind me, and I'm going to anchor this temple, you know, for the future, for the civilization to come. And I spent 3 years and gave everything day after day, and then abjectly failed at that, in the sense that I just became absolutely exhausted. I had nothing left to give, and the project needed to go into rest for a while. So that failure, like really meeting it and going into it and allowing it to exhaust me and bring up resources inside me that were beneath it, you know, turned those willingness to face into something really successful. And now that very project has come about and manifested from the monadic power rather than the soul power. So if someone had told me, look, you're not failing, you're just reaching the end of a growth of a certain stage of your being, and you are allowing something deeper is trying to come forward, but you're resistant to it, and your determination to try to do what you did before is the thing that's causing the problem. So, you know, we don't have elders in our world that teach us about soul initiation and teach us that we're supposed to grow through these phases and cycles. So that's why I'm saying, hopefully in the future, when we understand and educate about the monad and the soul, before focusing everything on somebody's ego and body-mind development, the better it will be. Because even now we have psychologists tell us, look, you've got to be someone before you can be no one. You've got to have a healthy ego. You've got to develop your ego. Well, not if that ego development is squashing your own soul. So we have so much ego development in the world that is alienating people from the deeper levels of their being, and then they wonder why they're desperately unhappy. So if we started with the deeper level, then maybe we could develop the ego from a healthy place.
Yeah. We are holding on the 20th to the 21st of June a fire point in the mountains here in Davos.
Beautiful.
And so with all that we have shared now, I would like to to have some kind of preparation also. What is this happening on the 21st of June this year? This alignment, this cosmical alignment, and how can we use it, this gate, for exactly a deeper shift in our own lives and in the collective.
Sure. Well, yeah, thanks for talking about that. It reminds me, like I said before, at the time of Copernicus, when they realized that the Earth went around the sun, this was a radical situation. It cost people like Bruno Giordano his life in Catholic Rome, and it was heresy to the civilization that existed and the religion that it existed. But all deep initiations are like that. Something new breaks into our awareness. And the power, if we go cosmologically for a moment, of this coming solstice, which is in 2 weeks, we're right now on the full moon, the coming new moon is an eclipse. And in the eclipse, the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And the sun and the moon, these two great lights, often represent consciousness and the unconscious, or thinking and feeling. So there's an eclipse. It's at the same time as the solstice, and the solstice is either the longest day or the shortest day, depending on whether which hemisphere you're in. And because it's on the solstice, which is already really rare, there's also an alignment with the center of the galaxy. So if you imagine, the chakras of this great being that we live in, the monad, the center of the galaxy, the sun, the soul, the body, mind, the planet Earth, and the moon are feelings and unconscious and body. They're all in a line. And this hasn't happened for many, many tens of thousands of years. And in my particular tradition, it said, if you ever see that happen, it's a sign for, mass initiation. And so for a couple of years now, I've been saying 2020 is a time that humanity is likely to go through a major initiation of the heart. And we've already seen this year the coronavirus and the riots and so on. And it looks like, these are things that we can control, but actually they're just an outer representation of a deep inner transformation that's going on in people's hearts. So the idea is that from the solstice, then we open up a period of a few months where those people who already know love, who have done their soul work, become more visible on the planet, because everybody's caught in this battle between the control of the old civilization and the rebellion, that wants to upwell and throw it over. But the third way is this way that we're calling the way of wild love, the way of actually being the very thing that is arriving rather than attacking the thing that's going or trying to hold on to it. So the invitation at the time of the solstice is to align and light a fire. So we have this project of 100 fires around the world. And what inspired that is that, in order to take a picture of the black hole, which we just did this year, in 2019, the first image of the center of a black hole, which was M87, was taken by using little telescopes all around the world and then putting all of their data together, okay, because we had to have a telescope the size of the Earth. So the image on the solstice is that these fires are like that telescope. There's 100 fires around the Earth, but there's only one fire. It's only one being lighting that fire through 100 different beings with 1,000 people. And so the idea is that we light those fires with an active will for the new civilization that's based on the dark light, that's based on the mystery and the not knowing and trust in the deep levels of our being, that we light the fires from that place. And then we accumulate all of the data. We get everybody's oracles together, their downloads, the images of their fire, and we create a composite so that we can feel into what is this new civilization based on ecstasy and the mystery and life and freedom and love. What is this, and how does it feel when we have 100 people, 100 fires all standing for that together? So most people, when they feel like, how can I make a difference? How can I change the world? They feel powerless because they're trying to do it as a single individual, in the face of 6 billion people and these inherent structures. But if we step back and be the center of the galaxy, be the life force of the universe, then shifting civilization on this little planet is a small thing. And we don't have to do it alone, we do it together. And there's hundreds of thousands of us now that can do it if we own our divine will and our ecstatic life force in order to bring the end to what needs to end and the beginning of what needs to begin. So solstice is a time for that, you know, united celebration of the earth tribe that is anchored in the life force, strong in their will, and aligned with the dark, the holy dark, the divine dark.
I love it. My whole being is yes.
Right, and that's how we know each other, you know, like
Exactly.
we know each other because our life force says, yes, that's what I'm on the planet for. That's what I live for.
Yeah. That's it.
Great. Well, it was lovely talking to you. And, you know, it might also be useful to put this out on the Fires group. So maybe you could send me a copy of it when you do.
Absolutely.
And, you know, like I haven't had a chance to ask you about your one movement, but I can feel it. I can feel its life. And I, you know, send my love and blessings and solidarity to whatever it is that you're doing as you're joining this process that we're all in. And may the life that's in you and the people that you work with flourish in the world now, because the world so desperately needs examples of people who are alive.
Thank you so much. Like, I'm so deeply touched, and yeah, my whole being is in an ecstatic, just yeah. This is so good. This is so good to connect. This is so good to share and just to remember and just to embody that life force. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thanks for reaching out.
Beautiful.
Bye now.
Thank you. All the best for you too.